Adding and subtracting fractions. Before we add or subtract fractions, the fractions must have the same denominator. So we normally find the least, which is like the smallest, common denominator, something they have in common. So in order to do that, let's take a look at two fractions, 2/5 and 3/4. We're going to list the multiples of the smaller denominator until we reach a multiple of the larger denominator. So our smaller denominator is 4. So I'm going to list the multiples of 4 until I see something that reminds me of a multiple of 5. So let's start. 4. Next one is 8. 8 is not a multiple of 5, so I keep going. 12, not a multiple of 5. 16, not a multiple of 5. 20, ding, 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 that's a multiple of 5 because I can go 5, 10, 15, 20. I can reach it. So 20 would be our common denominator. All right, so we're going to use this common denominator to add these two fractions, 2/5 plus 3/4. So we have to change them into two new fractions that have a denominator of 20. In order to do that, we figure out what we can multiply 5 by to get to 20. And I can multiply by 4. So I'm going to do 2 times 4, which is 8. Now I'm going to do that same thing to the fraction on the bottom here. 4 times 5 makes 20, so 3 times 5 makes 15. Now I just add the two numerators, and the denominator stays the same. So 8 plus 15 is 23, and the denominator would stay 20. But this looks a little silly. This is what we call an improper fraction. So I have to change it into a mixed number. So I really think about it as 23 divided by 20. So how many 20s are in 23? Well, there's 1, and when I subtract 23 minus 20, I get 3. So that would be my remaining fraction, 3 out of 20. So 23 over 20 equals 1 and 3 over 20. All right, let's look at another example where we have mixed numbers. So we have 2 and 2/3 plus 3 and 8 over 12. So remember, we take the smaller denominator and we figure out till we reach a multiple of the larger one. So I'm going to start. 3, 6, 9, 12. All right, so I reached 12, which is still a multiple of 12. So 12 would be my common denominator. So for this one, I only have to change one of my fractions. I have to change 2/3 into a fraction out of 12. This one just stays the same. I do not do anything with the whole number, just working with the fraction. So 3 times 4 makes 12. So 2 times 4 makes 8. All right, so now, once again, we're going to add the two fractions, and we're going to add the numerators together. So 8 plus 3 makes 16. And the denominator is 12. That stays the same. Now we add the two whole numbers. 2 plus 3 is 5. Once again, we have an improper fraction here, but we have to think about it a little bit differently. We have to think about it like 5 plus 1 plus 4/12, because 16 out of 12 is equal to 1 and 4/12, but we still had that 5. So we have to add those together, just those two whole numbers, and we'll get 6 and 1/3. Because 4 out of 12 can simplify to 1/3 because we can divide 4 by 4 to get 1 and 12 divided by 4 to get 3. So let's review that just one more time. What I did was I figured out how many 12s were in 16, and I knew that there was 1, so that's where this 1 came from. And then there were 4 out of 12 left over because 16 minus 12 makes 4. Then I just added the two whole numbers and then simplified that remaining fraction. Now let's look at an example of subtracting fractions. We're going to do the same thing, except instead of adding the numerators, we're going to subtract them. So I'm going to list out the multiples of the smaller denominator, which is 6, until I reach a multiple of 8. And I have 6, 12, 18, 24. Well, I know that 24 is a multiple of 8, so I'm going to go ahead and circle that. That's going to be my least common denominator. So now I'm going to change the two fractions out of something out of 24. 8 times 3 makes 24, so 7 times 3 makes 21. 6 times 4 makes 24, so 5 times 4 makes 20. Now I subtract the numerators, 21 minus 20, and I keep the denominator the same, 1 out of 24. So my solution is 1 out of 24. All right, let's look at one where we have two mixed numbers. Actually, we have a mixed number and just a fraction where we're going to subtract. So 3 and 1/4 minus a half. So I'm going to go ahead and list the multiples of 2, which is the smaller one, until I reach a multiple of 4. 2, 4. Well, 4 is a multiple of 4. So that's going to be my least common denominator. So I do not have to change the first one. It stays 3 and 1/4. I'm just going to change a half. 2 times 2 makes 4. So 1 times 2 is 2. Uh-oh. I wanted to subtract these two fractions, but I can't because this 1 is smaller than this 2. You can't do that. So we're going to do something where we borrow. I'm going to borrow from the 3, and that's going to turn into 2. Now I'm going to add that whole back into the fraction. But remember, to make a fraction whole, we have to think about what the denominator is. So a whole out of 4 is 4 out of 4. That makes 1. So I'm really going to add 4 to the numerator, and that makes 5. What I just did is called regrouping. We do this a lot when we're adding and when we're subtracting decimals. So you can do the same method when we subtract fractions, but you got to think about that whole. So these are the two fractions that I'm going to be subtracting. 2 and 5/4 and minus 2/4. So 5 minus 2 is 3/4, and then I do 2 minus nothing here, which makes 2. So my solution is 2 and 3/4. And that is adding and subtracting fractions.